Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm just kidding. I did because I put the camera there and then I hit record. Anyway, I'm Dave Otero, and today we're doing a quick mix lab that's a little less instructional and a little more informative. And we're going to compare some hardware compressors with some plug-in versions of the same hardware compressor. So let's dig into a project. Okay, so I have three plugins loaded up here and my one little hardware insert. And you can probably guess what piece of hardware we're comparing, and that is a Blue Stripe 1176. Now, I don't have an actual Universal Audio Blue Stripe, but I do have the Audioscape 76A, which, from everything that I know, is a pretty solid representation, or rather recreation, of the original Blue Stripe 1176 in all its imperfect glory. So the first thing we'll do here is, well, let's see. I've got a session loaded up with a single vocal line recorded, and they're all duped out here to separate channels, exact same audio in all of them. The first thing let's do is check out the raw, uncompressed vocal. There's also nothing else on this vocal. No EQ, nothing. Straight out of the mic into the mix. This raw track I have bumped up the volume a little bit on just to kind of get in the same ballpark as the compressed versions, but let's take a listen.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Cool. So cool take, but obviously uncompressed, and it doesn't sound right in this modern rock mix at all. So the first thing we'll do is head over to the hardware version and listen, and I'll maybe tweak the settings a bit, see if I can find a spot where I think it sounds good.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Okay, that sounds about right to me. Let's quickly compare the compressed hardware version with the raw version so we can talk about what it adds, and not only in the compression characteristics, but some of the distortion characteristics and tonal changes.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Cool. So obviously it levels everything out. It brings all elements, all syllables to the front. It also adds a cool kind of brightness and a little bit of saturation on top, which I've always found with 1176s, specifically the blue stripes, the older ones, goes a long way into having to do less in the mix. Like this track sounds like it needs less EQ, and then dialing in the attack and release characteristics, kind of, you can make it sound a little more exciting too. So a super fast release is going to sound nice and aggressive, but then you pull back that attack and it allows some of the percussive elements of a vocal performance to bite through and still kind of sound like it's like coming out at you, being aggressive, but while containing those dynamics at the same time. So that's kind of what I look to get out of a vocal compressor. And then let's see how close some of these other ones get. The first guy up is one that probably a lot of you have because it's been around for a long time and it goes on sale all the time for pretty cheap, and is definitely a solid compressor. It is the Waves CLA 76 on the blue revision. So let's jump to that guy and give it a listen.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fight.
Okay, so it definitely sounds good. It's definitely compressed. Why don't we go ahead and solo these two? and you can hear just the raw vocal through the hardware compressor against the waves. So we'll start with the waves.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
So honestly, that sounds pretty close to me. Compression-wise, they sound nearly identical. There may be some slight gain staging things that I could tweak and get a little closer. But to me, the hardware unit adds a little more of that sizzle saturation that I think we'll hear more if we listen to the mix. So let's do just that. This time we'll start with the Audioscape hardware unit, play once through, and then switch to the waves.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take. There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Cool. Now on the mix, we can definitely hear that it's missing a little excitement. The hardware unit gives a bit more of that high-end saturation. It's kind of like an extra level of compression almost. It adds a brightness, a sizzle, a kind of just aggressiveness frequency-wise over the whole take. So, but by no means a slouch. Next, let's try out the Plug-in Alliance MC77. Now, this isn't necessarily a Blue Stripe emulation. It's not even a Universal Audio emulation, but from what I found, it's one of the very best plug-in versions of an 1176. Let's listen to the MC77 soloed first.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
And the Audioscape.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Again, pretty similar, and I hear a little more of those saturation characteristics. We're comping these vocals pretty hard. That's generally what I like to do, but I'm also trying to push it to maybe bring out some of the differences that you might find. And obviously, this is by no means a scientific test. That kind of stuff doesn't interest me as much. Of course, we could dial all these up with graphs and look at the harmonic layers and things like that, but when it comes down to it, I want it to sound good, and I find I get more use out of a usability kind of scenario like this. Let's do that same test with the music. I'll start with the with the Audioscape this time, and then we'll switch to the Plug-in Alliance.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
And the plug-in.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
So again, it's better. I could probably level match these a little more. It sounds better to me than the waves. I think this is what I would go to every time in a plug-in situation. But to me, it's just still missing those saturation characteristics. And it's interesting because if you listen to it soloed, you might even prefer the plug-in version because it is a hair cleaner. The hardware tends to like get a little crusty on some of the sibilants and certain syllables. But when you drop it in a mix, man, all that sounds great. That's what gives it that vibe. Let's toss our last competitor into the ring now. And that's going to be the Slate FG 166 Blue version.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
And the Audioscape.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
Again, it sounds pretty close. You can hear some of the saturation characteristics, and that's one thing that I think the Slate model does pretty well, is the saturation aspect. It still kind of gets crispy on some of the S sounds and tends to add a little sheen over everything. But in my opinion, where it falls short is the actual compression characteristics. And I think when we play this in the mix, you'll hear that a little more. So again, let's start with the hardware.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
And the Slate.
There's something I've been needing to say. I'm getting sick of the fights and the shots you take.
So if you're hearing what I'm hearing, it's clearly being compressed. I mean, you can hear the saturation part. I'm watching the dial just get pinned. That's what a 1176 is supposed to look like on vocals to me. But it doesn't do the greatest job on the compression side. It feels like I have the mix turned down. That's kind of like, I feel like this is more like 50% or maybe 70%, and I'm still getting this dynamic element of the vocal performance come through that I don't want. I want it to just be pinned. I want it to be like right there the whole time. So it's kind of like the inverse of the Waves version, where the Waves nails the compression but falls a bit short on the saturation. The Slate does a great job of the saturation, but the most important part of a compressor is compressing, right? And it just doesn't, like, it really misses the boat as far as like bringing that vocal right to the forefront for me. The MC77 does a great job, a very admirable job, and is 1000% usable in a mix. But to my ears, the hardware version sounds best. I hope this gives you a bit of an insight, especially those of you who don't have the opportunity to play with hardware, of maybe what you're missing, and also that there's no reason why it should be holding your mixes back. All these are so close. We're just talking about that last 1 or 2%. But if you don't have the ability to use hardware in your mixes, don't consider that a crutch, and still know that you should be getting crushing mixes, and that's not something that's holding you back, but could give you a bit of a boost if you have the options.